lawlessness that rivaled the despotism of Ivan the Terrible. Moscow was flooded with Poles, and eventually the people revolted. False Dmitry, who had not even ruled for a year, was overthrown and executed. Vasily Shuisky, descendant of a well-known boyar bloodline, was declared Tsar. Immediately afterward, a peasant revolt swept the country. The weak power of the new Tsar generated new aspirants to the throne, supported by various forces. Cossack groups that had been called to protect the country's borders came to Moscow and also joined the struggle for power. Poles, Cossacks, Swedes, many other groups tried to take control of the Russian state. The patience of the Russian people eventually gave out, and the nation rallied in the face of external and internal threats. A merchant from Nizhny Novgorod, Kozma Minin, and Prince Dmitry Pozharsky raised a new national guard and set forth from Nizhny Novgorod to Moscow, where they expelled all interventionalists and assisted in the selection of the new Russian Tsar, Mikhail, from the boyar bloodline of the Romanovs. So a new dynasty of Russian monarchs was born. During the rule of Mikhail Romanov and that of his son, Tsar Alexei, the Russian people were granted a respite of peace. In the last third of the 17th century, Russia attained political stability, a certain degree of economic well-being, and even expanded the borders. In its Christian beliefs and history, mainly that of the Kievan Rus period, Russia was a European power, with a lifestyle that was rather more Asian. The people, in their slavish positions deprived of civil rights, and the nobles and aristocrat boyars were the more readily reminiscent of Asians. Certainly, there were educated boyars who knew languages. There were Russian diplomats who, upon returning home, told about the life in Europe, but they were a precious few of them. Most boyars were poorly educated, lazy, not interested in changing anything in their lives, and saw the West as a threat to their well-being. In order to survive and to take a worthy place among the nations of the world, Russia needed rapid modernization, and as though obeying the call of history, a person appeared whom one can readily call a genius. This was Tsar Peter I, who came to be called Peter the Great. He was of gigantic stature, possessed unrestrained energy and a set of talents in various areas of human endeavor. He identified his purpose in life as the advancement of Russia to the status of a leading European power. In his youth, he spent a lot of time in the small enclave of Europeans in Moscow. He probably already understood at the time how much Russia was lagging behind Europe and decided on a radical restructuring of Russian life. He acted bravely, decisively, and even cruelly.
Мы моря хотим воевать. Полагаем счастье нашей страны в успехах морской торговли, а сие благословение Господне. Без иноземцев мне в военном и морском деле никак нельзя. А попробуй тронь их кирки до костела, они все разбегутся. Это что же? Крылья мне подшибаете!
After the death of the father, Tsar Alexei, Peter's sister, Sophia, ascended to the throne. Her principal support was the Streltsy divisions, the self-styled guardians of the traditional order. Peter dealt with them very severely, and even personally beheaded some of them in an area near the Moscow Kremlin that came to be called the Red Square. In the struggle with the conservatives clinging to old traditions, their way of life, and the boyar opposition, Peter did not even regret executing his own son Alexei. Peter was cruel only with those who hindered the implementation of his overreaching idea to put Russia abreast of the leading European countries. Peter totally changed life in Russia. It is simply amazing that one person, even an autocrat, was able to do so much in a relatively short period. He went to Europe together with a large retinue, which he forced to study trades, engineering and marine business, economy and customs. He sent the sons of noblemen to Europe for training.
Нас с сыном теперь простись. Ничего не пожалеешь. Скоро за графами буду жаловать.
Peter ordered the boyars to shave their beards, ladies to dress in the low-neck dresses and hold European-style balls. Elite society and the ruling class was completely transformed, even outwardly. Peter himself worked for a time as a carpenter under an assumed name in order to master shipbuilding. With the aid of young merchants, he created a new industry providing the army with weapons. He waged wars with the Swedes, the Turks, and with the Swedes again. in order to annex new territories and mainly to provide Russia with the access to the sea. After all, until that time, the Russian state did not have any ports in the Baltic or the Black Seas. Having failed in the first years of his rule in the war with Turkey, Peter was not fazed. He started a war with the Swedes and won access to the Baltic Sea. In addition, on a wild patch of Baltic seashore, where there were only woods and bogs, he built the new capital of the Russian Empire, St. Petersburg, which became the window to Europe for Russia. Peter's associates, the baby birds of Peter's nest, not only built a new city, which was no less beautiful than the leading European capitals, but also carried out Peter's dream to build a Russian navy, then create a modern army using Swedish and German experts. Peter has an absolutely special place in Russian history, having been just about the only successful reformer. He left an absolutely new country after his reign. Russian history is now divided into two periods, the pre-Petrine Russia and the post-Petrine Russia. After Peter's death, there came the so-called Century of Palace Revolutions. Rulers were enthroned by palace guards. In the beginning, Peter's wife Yekaterina became the empress. Then power passed to Peter's grandson, Tsarevich Peter Alexeyevich, who ruled for only 3 years. And then the guardsmen planted Peter's niece, Anna Ivanovna, on the throne. During her rule, her favorite, Biron, practically ruled the country. After Anna's death, for a short time, the baby Ivan Antonovich was declared the emperor, with his mother and Anna Ivanovna's niece, Anna Leopoldovna, as regent. The guards successfully dethroned him and enthroned Peter's daughter Yelizaveta, who did not have children. Elizabeth's rule lasted for 20 years, and after her death, Peter III ascended to the throne. He was Yelizaveta's nephew, and he married the German princess Frederica Usta-Angeltsevsky, who received the name Yekaterina, or Catherine in Russia. The guards did not like Peter. Eventually, guardsmen dethroned and killed the unlucky emperor, and made Catherine, who they did like, the Russian Tsarina. Empress Catherine II, subsequently also called Catherine the Great. So, in 75 years, there were 8 rulers, Shakespearean passions, intrigues, treachery, favorites, traitors, valorous guardsmen, revolutions, and all of this in the higher echelons of power. Nevertheless, the country continued to move on the course that Peter had set for it. Russia waged wars both in the west and in the south. A series of Russian-Turkish wars resulted in the Russian Empire annexing Crimea and the northern Black Sea coast, having at last gained access to the warm waters of the Mediterranean Sea. The Russian army also battled successfully on the country's western boundaries. Lithuania, Belarusia, and the western areas of the Ukraine became parts of Russia as the result of several divisions of Poland. A broad wave of European culture washed over Russia, changing not only the appearance of people and city streets, it also changed the intellectual atmosphere in the country. After the Moscow University, which was already established in Yelizaveta's time, a number of educational institutions opened in the capital of St. Petersburg. Catherine II managed to some extent to return the monarchy to its former glory. She also took some steps to further Europeanize and humanize Russian life.
Россия есть страна великая, единая и неделимая. Россия – держава суть европейская, а граждане российские – суть европейцы. Не рабы, а мои подданные – свободные граждане.
However, a peasant revolt led by Yemelyan Pugachev so frightened the empress that during her rule she curtailed her liberal projects, of which there were many. In particular, she wanted to finally create a new code of laws, but the society's energy shifted from lawmaking to wars, in which new Russian commanders distinguished themselves, particularly Admiral Ushakov and Count Suvorov. The empress ruled for more than 30 years. Catherine II was considered educated and corresponded with French philosophers and the creators of the first encyclopedias. Catherine's years of rule are sometimes called the Golden Age. Catherine's son Pavel inherited the throne after the death of his mother. During Catherine's reign, she did not let him to privy or to state affairs, considering him to be not so clever and competent. After his accession to the throne, Pavel immediately started to eradicate any free thinking. He introduced strict censorship, forbade Russian citizens to study abroad, and foreigners to freely enter Russia. In general, he was extravagant and mentally not well adjusted.
Дворцовых фаворитов и угодников вон! Отныне крестьяне будут работать на бар своих не более 3 дней в неделю. Казенную службу начинать с 6, нет, с 5 часов поутру. Берегитесь, лукавцы!
Some of his acts shocked his contemporaries. He severed diplomatic relations with England and sent 40 regiments of the Don Cossacks to conquer India with neither maps nor an actual plan. Some of the new emperor's acts and decisions were so ridiculous and silly that eventually the Guards' patience ended, and as a result, they hatched a plot in which Pavel's son, Alexander, participated. Pavel was killed, and the successor Alexander became the emperor. Alexander began his rule by cancelling the decrees of his father, returning many of the wrongly punished from exile. In general, the young emperor intended to carry out various liberal reforms. Russia was already a powerful realm. The country's population was about 70 million. Russia's foreign policy in the early 19th century was defined by opposition to Napoleonic France. Consequently, the Russian army, which was used to waging wars of aggression, had to wage a defensive war for the first time. After a series of battles and truces, a 600,000-strong French army led by Napoleon crossed the borders of Russia and moved in the direction of Moscow. The Russian commanders, Barclay de Tolly, Bagration, and the legendary commander-in-chief, Kutuzov, used very sly tactics in the war with Napoleon. They did not enter into decisive battles and full frontal assaults, but retreated, trying to squelch the French on the roads where they would not have enough transport or rations, in the hope that the French army would lose its power on the huge open plains of Russia. Only when the French reached the settlement of Borodino, near Moscow, did a great battle come about in which neither side was able to gain a decisive victory. The Russian army, having weakened the French, nevertheless gave them their former capital, Moscow. There, the conquerors did not manage to celebrate the triumph, as there was a large fire. The now weakened and anemic French army was compelled to leave Moscow and all but flee back from where they came. The Russian commander's plan worked brilliantly. The results of this war were disputed. In France, it was considered yet another victorious campaign, since the French occupied the capital of Russia and did not lose a single battle. Russian historians have more of a basis to claim victory since the enemy was expelled from the country. And Russian society of that time certainly considered it a victory and felt a huge surge of patriotism. Within a period of 2 years, and after a number of bloody battles, Russian forces, together with their allies Prussia, Austria, and England, invaded France and captured Paris. Having passed through all Europe, Russian officers, who were basically representatives of aristocratic and noble families, have brought their free-thinking ideas back with them from their campaigns in Europe. Secret societies formed, the goals of which were to modernize Russia in a number of ways. In 1825, when Emperor Alexander died, he did not have a successor. In view of his brother Constantine's refusal to ascend to the throne, Alexander's other brother, Nicholas, was declared. Conspirators took advantage of the situation and deployed the army to Palace Square in St. Petersburg. The Guards